Sweet surrender as I love, serve, and remember.
So these Pharisees brought a woman who was accused of adultery to him, and they wanted him to judge her. And Jesus is sitting on the ground, sort of writing in the sand. And he looks up and he said, "Let that person among you who has never sinned throw the first stone." And then suddenly the stone whipped right by him towards it, and he looks to see who threw it. He's like, "Mom." If you're a human being on this earth, you have a shadow. No one is so evolved, no one is so pure that we don't have a shadow. And that's a very beautiful and humbling awareness that we can evolve to very high heights, but no matter where we go, we have a shadow. Now, many of you may know what I mean by shadow, because one thing that's happened, I would say, in the last 20, 30 years is it's become much more a part of our parlance. Even as I was looking it up, it's amazing. All these different spiritual paths and teachings all have a practice, a class on shadow. But some of you may not know what I mean. So I'm just going to talk. The shadow is that part of ourself, the unconscious part that we don't want to see. Sometimes we can say it's a part of ourselves that we don't like. I don't like using that word because I don't like using that word. I don't like seems very tepid, very soft. My experience with at least my shadow is I use the word ugly because ugly is something that when I hear ugly, I constrict. I'm like, I really don't want to see ugly. Like that has a really negative feeling tone in me, and that's what our shadow is. It's not something like, oh yeah, I don't care for it. I would rather not have that. It's not going to probably be a shadow. It's probably something we're willing to look at because it really doesn't cause us too much consternation. Something that's going to really cause us some challenges is to say, I have parts in me that I really find ugly. So how do we know what those parts are? Because one of the things they teach about the shadow is we're blind to it. We don't want to see that about ourselves. We want to see the good stuff. Or even maybe the not so good stuff, but not really bad, but the stuff we don't really want to see, so we hide it. So there's two easy ways, and then we'll go into the longer ways. By the way, I just have to say, I'm getting a new tooth, and I have an impermanent, and it's giving me a little bit of challenge. So if you hear a little lisp, you're not imagining it. So, because I remember the one thing I learned when I was acting school, if you have a lisp and you have a microphone, bad combination. So I'm suddenly very conscious of it. So, two easy ways to catch on to one of your shadows that might be a blind spot for you. You get really annoyed with somebody else. Not like, oh, they like a clear, cool, like that's not appropriate to do that. That's a clear boundary, you're clear, and that's fine. A trigger is something that like, that is terrible that they did that. I can't believe it. You just have this emotional reaction. I know you all know what I'm talking about, right? That it's hot. Andrew Harvey calls it hot and cold. And if you have a reaction that's not okay, but you have a coolness to it, that's not a trigger. But if you have heat to it, that's an emotional trigger. And if it's about someone else, the way you look at it, say, okay, what about what they're doing do I have? And that's when it can get a little uncomfortable. Because if you're really hot, you really don't like what they're doing, it becomes very humbling to say, oh, that might be in me too, and start doing the work. So that's a very simple process of figuring out our shadow. There's another very accurate way to find our shadow, but you have to have people who are courageous in your life, and you have to be willing. I'm not very willing, so I never asked this question. But Reverend Michael talks about it. I know there's a whole group institute that focuses on this. You ask the people closest to you, what's my shadow? Because I guarantee you other people know your shadow, especially the people who know you well. They may not want to enlighten you. They might be afraid of like, oh my gosh, they don't want to hear this about themselves, so I don't want to tell them. Really, not not in a nice way, but really, what is your shadow? But they see it about you, and you see it about them. And that's one of the things I really liked when I was listening to a therapist talk about it, talking about we all have blind spots, and so we need to be gentle with one another. Because it is hard. Just as it's hard for us to own those shadows in our own life, it's hard for other people to see that we all have shadows, and we always have them. So to be gentle with one another. If someone beats you over the head and say, this is what you're not seeing about yourself, this is what you've been doing, and that doesn't help you heal the shadow. That makes you go further into reclusiveness, to hide. If we want to heal it, we have to feel safe enough to let that shadow be, even if we can't see it, say, okay, I see that you're hearing, I hear that, and I feel safe with you telling me that because I know you still love me. I know you're helping me in this process, and then I can go through that process. But I'm not going to do that unless I feel safe with you, and vice versa. They're not going to do it with us unless they feel safe with us. So having a shadow is something we all have, and we want to be gentle with our own shadow and other people's shadow. And it's ongoing work, and some of it is very deep work. I just gave two very simple examples, and that can do it sort of simply, but the whole purpose of therapy is to really dig in, because we really do hide from ourselves. And if you've ever done any type of therapy or work with an individual, a healing work, you'll find that there's layers that you've hidden from yourself, and by having someone who's gently and not in a hurry, not just because if you do it all at one time, it's too much. You're gently revealing it to us, that allows it to come out and to heal. I'm not in a 12-step program, and I imagine that what I hear from a lot of people who are in 12-step programs, this is a lot of the work that happens in 12-step, owning things, seeing things that you weren't willing to see and own before. And it's loving, and it's gentle, and it's safe. When I was at Agape, so Agape is a community like this one. It's in Los Angeles, and when I was there in the 90s, there were thousands of people. So I think I've mentioned I was in the Department of Education, we had 1,200 students going through classes in a year. And they had a lot of practitioners. So for those of you who don't know, practitioners are people who have taken a lot of classes. It takes 2 years to even be eligible to go into practitioner training, and once you go into practitioner, that's another 2-year program where you're doing a lot of work on yourself, doing healing works from a spiritual perspective. And then at the end of the practitioner training, you get a written test. If you pass that, you get an oral test, and then you get licensed. So it's a commitment. And so at Agape, we had so many people going through classes, so we had, when I was there, probably about 400 people who were practitioners, which is bigger than most centers. So there's a lot of practitioners, and at varying degrees of awareness. But what was interesting this all happened right when I was there. A few people started after they became a practitioner, they'd been a practitioner for a couple years, and then they started going to a program at University of Santa Monica, a Master's of Psychology program. And it met once a month for a year. It was a 2-year program, and they had people coming from other countries. People came from all over to be part of this program. And once a few people went, suddenly there became a watershed of so many Agape practitioners doing this spiritual psychology program. Because what they found was, even though they had done all this spiritual work and they had a deep spiritual life, there was this human element that wasn't getting addressed. And by going to the spiritual psychology program, suddenly these masks that they had, because we can even use spirituality as a mask. We can use because spirituality is true. So I'm whole, perfect, and complete is a true statement. In the absolute sense, I am whole, perfect, and complete. I am a divine emanation of pure spirit moving through and as me. All of that is true for every one of us here right now, always and forever. And it is powerful to be in classes that continually remind us so we can open and expand to that truth. But there's also another reality, which is when we open to that spiritual vastness, when we move into the higher consciousness, we actually can't see our human self very well. We have to actually come down to our human self to see our human self and to do work at that level. Just like I can in the vastness, I can feel perfectly fine. I can feel abundant. I can feel beautiful. I can feel, I don't know, whatever that I want to feel, freedom, joy, all of it. But then I have to come back to my human life, and unless I'm going to sit on a meditation pillow 24/7, I have to participate in my human body to animate joy, to animate health. If I want to animate health, I'm going to participate. I'm going to take care of my body. I'm going to exercise. All of those things. I can be in meditation and know my perfection, but in this world, I have to deal with the physical realm too, and that's true with our emotions. And all the shadows is part of our human emotional self that no matter how much we meditate, will not touch the psychology of our humanity. And so what people were doing was they were going to this spiritual psychology program, and things were being uncovered that they never knew. They were sharing, even after all those years of training, it was just one piece of the puzzle that was missing. And I saw so many people shifting as powerfully as they shifted in prac training. It's just a little different. And the reason why so many people started doing the spiritual psychology program is because I think we have a hunger for both. We have a hunger to know who we are spiritually, but we also want to know who we are humanly. And in that embracing of their humanity, so many artistic, creative expressions came out because that comes from the stuff that we're working through, that soul stuff of living in the human body, comes through, that creativity comes through being present in our human body. But it's been a lot of years since then, and I've thought a lot about this because it's been 20 years. I know the people who've been that. People have done therapy, and now there's 1 million shadow programs, and if you're interested in doing this work, there's a program for you, and I suggest it. There's incredible tools, all of this stuff. But here's the thing we have to learn. The shadow doesn't go away. There's an element in us that says, if I keep doing this work, if I can just fix it, I will never have the shadow again. And in the absolute, that's true. In the absolute, there is no shadow. It does not cast a shadow. But in this human realm, we will always have a shadow. And to deny that actually can become destructive to ourselves or to others. Because if we're not seeing it, we're not addressing it or owning it, not to control it, not necessarily to go away, but at least owning that, yeah, that is a part of me, then it can do damage towards other people. So I've seen this a lot in spiritual teachers, especially in modern day spiritual teachers, because there was a very strong lineage tradition, and you would get, for instance, 2 of my teachers, Shinrin Suzuki and Yogananda, they had very strong teachers who were very hard on them, both of them. They would call them out all the time because our ego, the shadow is made of our ego unattended. And so they're addressing it. They're constantly calling forth, you think you're doing this for spiritual reasons, but you have an ulterior agenda. And they would call them on that, and they were harsh. And so what I love about both of these teachers is that there was just a true, genuine humility, not a false humility, not a humility like I have to be humble, but they generally knew that humanly, they could say, in alignment with Jesus, of myself I am nothing. It is the presence within me that does the work. But I of myself, and that isn't self-flagellation. There's something very beautiful about that and pure, because humanly, we are not in control. And there's something so gorgeous to honor that while we're going through training, this earth life being training. This life experience is to constantly remember that we're still human. And I'm just going to give you one example. Unfortunately, I have way too many of these examples, but I just want to give one because I think it's important, as the whole theme this month is Enlighten Up, is just to be conscious of it, because I see people get caught in it and have seen people get caught in it. There was a teacher who was in India, had all these amazing, enlightening experiences, felt he was ready and came over to the States to be a spiritual teacher. His guru in India did not sign off on that, was not what he wanted, but he was attaining. And so he came here, started his own community, and he's a powerful teacher. He was, so I've talked about it before. He was the teacher who, when we did a meditation group, he created a process where within an hour I went into a state of bliss. And we didn't meditate, we didn't pray, but just through his ability to bring consciousness into that group, the bliss was great. He and his group put out a magazine, What is Enlightenment magazine? It came out quarterly. Best magazine out there. I couldn't wait till it came. It was so provocative. He was so full of life. He would talk about things that no one else was talking about, not just him, the whole group. It was so interesting. I had a friend who was at, this was when the world's religion was in Spain, and she said, oh my gosh, there's this guy, Andrew Cohen. Everybody loved him. He was amazing. He was like incredible, spiritually energetic, powerful, helping people to open into these blissful states fairly easily. But the thing Andrew didn't have was someone checking that ego. He left his guru, and so he's sort of on his own. And I'm saying this because in the spiritual progressive world, we have less and less accountability. There's no one sort of saying, you're a little off here, because we can fool ourselves. And so I don't think he had bad intentions when he started at all. But without a check on that ego, and there's no one, people are afraid, people are having spiritual experiences about this guy. They're not going to correct him. They're not going to say, well, you're a little off here. Well, some did, actually. But he just, the amount of people that loved him, it didn't even touch his awareness. So what happens, that unattended shadow in us, if we are not attending to it, it gets bigger and bigger and more hurtful. And so as he grew in his status, so did his ego. And he started causing a lot of harm to people and would not own it. And so eventually, years after I had my experience, he was ousted. He's like, this guy's too, and in fact, I didn't even know they had a little documentary on how unhealthy that community was. I don't think he started out that way. I think his intention was good. But he didn't attend to that ego, and it did harm. And it stuck with me because I remember the people who were going to the spiritual psychology program, I remember them saying that. They said, if you don't deal with your shadow, it's going to come and bite you somewhere along the way. So we want to make friends with our shadow, knowing it's not going to go anywhere, to have the humility that I will always have this part of me that isn't capable of doing all the great things that I think I'm capable of, that is in some way weak, incapable, unworthy. It has the thing about the shadow too, it moves. Like just when I think I got this part down, it pops up over here. I don't know if you'll, there's a great little video. It's sad, but it's so accurate. Have you seen it? It's a little girl. She's like 3, and she's walking with her mom, and her mom's filming, and then all of a sudden she just stops, and she notices her shadow. And she looks at her shadow, and she's just looking at it, and she's noticing it's following her, and she doesn't like it, so she takes off. And then you can see after she's run really fast, and you can just see she's relieved. She looks at her, because there it is again. And that's, to me, I'm like, that's a perfect example. Like, we just think we've got it, we've outrun it, and dang it if it doesn't show up in another place. And it scares us. The more we recognize, it's always going to be there. I'm never sure where it's going to show up. I never know when I'm going to get triggered. I'm never sure when. But to recognize and have the humility to say, oh, I'm human. These things happen. So I was telling Jack, this, I think this is such an important topic, but it's not necessarily a fun topic. However, I happened to be, when I was a little kid, I had a little kid's record, and it's the only record I had, so I played it over and over again. No, I might have had a Monkees record, but mostly I played this record, and it had a song that I loved. And it's basically what I didn't know. It's profundity at the time about making friends with your shadow. So I dread doing this, but I just think when we're talking about an unhappy subject, we have to at least have a happy song. So bear with me. I don't want to do this, but I have to. Me and my shadow and me, we're always together, as close as can be. We make pictures on the floor and the wall like rabbits and dogs, And that's not all. Wherever we go, we have company. Me and my shadow, my shadow and me. Totally silly. I never thought when I was a little kid I'd be singing that in front of people. But I love the song because we do want to make friends with our shadow, where it's not our bright spot, but it's always a part of us. We welcome it. Karen, a woman named Karen Faith, which I love that name, she said unconditional love felt hard to her, so she did unconditionally welcoming. And so she practices unconditionally welcoming with all the parts of herself and with all people. Even she was telling a story of a person she really just didn't like or respect. But she said, nope, I have to practice unconditional welcoming. And as she did and heard this person's story, her heart, it was natural. Once you get to know that shadow, all the shadows have a gift. That's the part that God knows what they're doing. Every part of it. That when we listen to the shadow, oh, I didn't see that part of myself before. It's just another layer that I get to see. I become more authentic. Another mask comes off. I get a little freer. I get a little lighter. I don't have to control everything because I know, you know what, I'm going to be okay. Anyone who's done any type of inner work, I know many of you have, you get lighter when you do it. It might get heavy at first, but then it gets so light because you are not afraid of the shadow. When the shadow is not something to be frightened of, but to be welcomed, our hearts open. Because that's the entire journey of this earth, is to open our hearts to all of it. The dark night of the soul. The dark night of the soul is a very specific experience, and it's not so, because I was looking it up and people attribute it to everything now. To grieving, to I'm having a really, really rough time, lost my job, don't have money to pay, my relationship broke up, I'm in a dark night of the soul, I don't know what I'm doing. Don't know what I'm doing could be divine discontent, which is a positive experience. Dark night of the soul is a term that came from St. John of the Cross, and it's for people, as Michael Beckwith wrote in his book, for people who are deeply committed on the spiritual path. So you've already done a lot of spiritual work, and then suddenly, everything goes empty. You're in a desert, and it does not matter what your spiritual practices are. Nobody can touch it, friends, family, no, it's complete emptiness. It is not depression. I've been depressed in my life. I've had difficult times. It is none of that. And it was hard because the reason why I didn't want to spend all the week the service on Dark Night of the Soul, because A, a lot of people haven't had the experience, and B, it's really dark. I mean, it was for me, horrible experience. So Reverend Michael was talking about one of his experiences in it. He says, I think one of the things he was saying was that you don't know when it's going to end. When everything goes dry, like everything you've ever done that because spirit is the place where I find my sanctuary. Spirit is where I find my rest. And when that's gone, when that connection is gone, and I don't know how long it's gone for, and I can't, like, it's not even depressed. I would still go through life. I remember Reverend Michael going through one of his experiences when at Agape. Most of the people didn't know. It was just a conversation we had that I'm like, oh, I see. And it looked horrible because I saw what was happening behind the scenes. You're still showing up for life. You're still fine. But behind the scenes, no. And I remember, this is the humility part, I thinking in the 90s, oh, that's never going to happen to me because I have such a powerful relationship with God and I do all my spiritual practices, like Reverend Michael didn't. I'm so evolved and so connected, and so I just denied. I was like, yeah, that's you. That's not me. I know who I am. And it was just over 10 years later that I went into my experience of the Dark Night of the Soul. And as I've said before, you don't know you're going into it. There's no one's telling you you are now entering. It was just this empty. Suddenly everything felt empty. Nothing. And I went to an integral psychologist, and he was saying, well, maybe you've outgrown ministry. I'm like, no, I don't think it has anything to do with out there. It doesn't matter what happens out there. It's just empty. And so you have to keep showing up And I kept doing my spiritual practices. I didn't give up. And I always knew that God was there, but I just couldn't feel it. It's like walking in that relationship where if you've been in a strong relationship and then suddenly you go through a period where it's fallow, you don't quit the relationship, you just know you go through a fallow period. So I was in this period, and it was interesting because as I was listening to Reverend Michael, he was saying he knows the exact moment when there began to be a little bit of light. And I'm like, that was true for me. I can tell you exactly where I was and what I was doing the moment, because it was so dark. I mean, it was so dark. And then suddenly there was this pinprick of light. And the pinprick of light was, I used to go to Starbucks early in the morning, 5 or 5:30 before Julian woke up, and there's a group of us that would go there early. So I saw them all the time. And this one guy who I saw every week just suddenly out of the blue came and just put the Practicing the Presence by Brother Lawrence on my table. And he said, I thought you might like this. Since nothing was working, I opened it and started reading it, and it was like the light went off. I was hungry. I was like, it's like in a desert, and you suddenly get a little sprinkle of water. And because I'm praying, because it's a little tiny book. And I'm thinking, this isn't going to last me long. This is what I want. I don't even know what it is, but I want this. And so I was praying. I'm like, what do I do when the book ends? And I'm reading really slow so it doesn't end. And then my neighbor who lives below us, who I see and we chit-chat, but that's it. He walked into Starbucks just as I was ending the book, and he said, I don't know, I just feel called to give you this book. And he gave me a book, and it was a book about these Christian Eastern Orthodox monks on Mount Athos. In any other world, prior to the Dark Night of the Soul, I would have never read that book. In fact, in 1993, I had met someone who I had a deep spiritual connection with, but he was very Catholic. And I was very anti-Catholic. It sort of went against all my beliefs of freedom, free thinking, God loves everybody, hello, duh. And then here's this person who I feel a spiritual connection, but he really believes in all this Catholic stuff. And so I was so confused. Like, how can you be that spiritual and be so lost? And so I was praying, and I had a dream. I didn't understand the dream. I asked him, I said, well, I was in this space, and I described an Eastern Orthodox teaching. This is 1993. I had never even heard of Eastern Orthodox. I had no idea what it was. So I looked it up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they're as rigid as the Catholic teaching. No, I don't know why Spirit said that was going to help me. The dream, by the way, extraordinary love. That's why it stuck with me. It was such an intense love that I felt there. But as a human, and I'm reading the book, no. I mean, this is back in 1993, so 20 years later, exactly 20 years later, 2013, I'm reading this book about these Orthodox monks, and I'm thinking, this is what I've been looking for my whole life. And it wasn't the whole picture, but it was the piece that was missing, the piece that was agonizing to me, that I'd done all this work. That Andrew Cohen is part of Integral, all these people, everything was blowing up, and I was just lost faith. None of it meant anything to me anymore. And I wanted something that was real, and I'm reading something real. The guy who was writing the book was an agnostic, so he was not reading it. He wasn't writing about the theology, but their spirituality, the way they were living. And the way they were living was pure. And the thing that struck me more than anything was like genuine humility. I had been living in one of the things about in the spiritual progressive world, we can get very arrogant about everything that we know. I know this, I know that. And these monks were so genuinely tender and humble, and yet experiencing God all over the place, but they weren't taking credit for any of it. They were just the vehicles. And my heart just opened. And that new life started for me, and it still is. I still have to read a little bit of Orthodox spirituality, not the religion, but the spirituality every day, because it feeds me. The dark night of the soul opened me up to a part of my soul that I never, ever would have opened up to had I not gone through that dark night of the soul. And it was specific to me. Because I remember, Gloria knows, Beth knows, I brought the book into our classes, and I asked other people to read it, and some people didn't like it, and other people were like, yeah, it's okay. Okay, what do you mean? This is like the thing. And that's the beauty of our teaching, of this organization, is every one of us has parts of our soul that is specific to us, and other people may not get it, but we have to get it. And what happened with that dark night of the soul is I let go of everyone else's opinion, and I was open and available and humble enough to read something that I never would have absolutely and taken in if I hadn't gone through that experience. And that's true for every one of us. I don't know, Michael said he's been through several dark night of the souls. I'm hoping that's the only one I ever go through. I don't need more spiritual growth, okay? But the idea is that all of it, the dark night of the soul is hard. What the dark night of the soul is, it's when the old is dying away and something new wants to be shown to us, but we're not ready for it yet, and that's the fallow ground. The old has died away, it's not feeding us anymore, the new hasn't shown up yet, and so we're in that fallow ground. But it's like winter. It will come to an end, and you will have new life. God, this divine love intelligence knows exactly what it's doing. When we are committed to our enlightened up theme of waking up to our true spiritual magnificence, to waking up to the beauty and the joy and the glory of the living God as all life, we will have these experiences of dark night of the soul, of our shadow that is with us. And the intention of the talk is A, to let us know that it's there, and B, you have done nothing wrong. And in fact, it's because you're doing everything right that you experience these dark nights of the soul, these shadow experiences. That is absolutely a sign that you are being true and integral to your beautiful spirit within you, that divine God being, divine Buddha being, Christ being. By being true to your true self, these things show up to help us become even more what we are longing for. And the more we grow, we won't be able to skip it. That's why I had to talk about it, because to the extent that every one of us here are on an authentic spiritual journey, these are things we can't skip over. We have to go through them. And so we are gentle with one another. We are kind to one another. We are loving with one another. Because this journey is hard, but there's nothing more extraordinary and more fulfilling and more freeing and more fun and more spectacular than waking up to our true self. Let's pray. And so we anchor ourselves in that which is in all creation, but we remember that it also transcends all creation. So let us begin with that transcendent awareness. That transcendent awareness where there is no opposites, where there is no other, where there is no shadow, where there is no dark and light, where it is all this radiant, beautiful light. It is a light not of this world, as the monks call it. It's uncreated light. And this uncreated light is everywhere present. We can't see it. We can't make it happen, but it is already who and what we are. And when we take time to just stop and let go of just time and space, we get to enter into this light. And so in this moment, we're stopping and taking time to be in this light. And to remember, this is who and what we are all of the time. This light is always caring for us. It is always for us. It cares about all of its creation and all of its forms and all of its dimensions. And most importantly, this light cares about you, specifically you. You are the center of this light's love. You are the center where it knows no circumference. It cares deeply about all of her creation. And she is fully, completely, and forever holding you in her arms, loving you, healing you, shining as you, dancing as you, healing and revealing this radiant light as your life in every area, physically, emotionally, mentally, financially, health, your job, your relationships with all people, family, friends, your community, as a citizen of this country and world. In every way, this light is right here, shining in through and as you, holding those parts of you that you might feel are unacceptable to light, those parts that you might label ugly. Light embraces and holds those parts of us always. It is always unconditionally welcomed, all aspects of who we are. It is our friend. Every part of our life is for us. Every part of life is for us. Even the unpleasant parts, even the unpleasant feelings and experiences within us, and the unpleasant experiences external to us, when we stand in the light, in facing them, in holding them and caring for them as part of our journey. We cannot escape. There's no place to go. Just stand in the light, embracing in love all those things that we might say is other than us. And when we do, we will see a transformation beyond our wildest imagination. And we will see a tenderness, and we will see a lightness of being, knowing that all the imperfection is absolutely essential to the perfection. All the imperfection of ourselves individually and of this world are part of the glorious absolute perfection. We stand in this, we love it, we say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, divine love intelligence, for loving us, knowing us, guiding us, protecting us, healing us, and dancing into light as every one of us. Thank you, and we release this word, we release this knowing, and be willing just to surrender, as Michelle so beautifully sang about. Surrender to that love that includes it all, that welcomes it all. Surrender, surrender, surrender. And so it is.
I walk in God, in